I'm Andy Copel, author of Wilmington Then and Now, a book that shows pictures of downtown Wilmington and other portions of New Hanover County as they were in the past, and shows how these locations appear today. New Hanover County schools have a program called Tar Heels Go Walking. Elementary school students have an opportunity to walk downtown, look at the more significant buildings, and today we have some of those students with us. They are prepared to ask some questions about some of the buildings that they saw when they went on the tour.
We saw the sheriff's department yesterday. It was a lot of red brick. Was that building always there?
That's a good question, Blaine. Originally, the location where that building was the home of the Beery family. You may have heard their name because that was part of the Belk-Beery department store. Actually, that house remained there until about 1950. Then it became a used car lot associated with Rainey Chevrolet, and after Rainey Chevrolet moved to the location on College Road where Jeff Gordon Chevrolet is today, back in the 1970s, the late 1970s, the Sheriff's Department building was built.
The old courthouse on 3rd Street was cool. Has it always looked like that?
Well, that courthouse hasn't really changed too much over the years. It was originally built in 1892, and if you look at the pictures in the book, you will see that it's pretty much retained its appearance in the past just as it is today. That's one of the buildings that the people of New Hanover County are most proud of.
Has 3rd Street changed further down from the City Hall and Thalian Hall?
There have been some changes, Kara, and I'm glad you asked that question. Actually, one of the major changes on 3rd Street was on the northeastern corner of 3rd and Market. Many years ago, shortly after the turn of the century in the early 1900s, there was a hotel there called the Colonial Inn. Later it came to be known as the Colonial Apartments. And that building remained there until the early 1960s, and for many years afterwards it was a parking lot. Now we're in the process of building a new courthouse at that location.
The library downtown was really big. Did you find out anything about that building?
That building has an interesting story behind it. Originally, the library was a department store. It was actually the Belk-Beery department store, and it was built in 1951. Belk-Beery originally was on North Front Street, but to have more space to do their business, they built the building, and it remained the Belk-Beery department store until Independence Mall was built in the late 1970s. After the building became empty, New Hanover County decided that it would be best to use the building for a library, and it's been a library since the early 1980s.
When we went to the old post office building yesterday, we saw an awesome mural painted on the wall. How long has that building been there?
It's a very interesting story associated with the post office. One of the greatest architectural losses in New Hanover County was a post office that had been built about 1888 that looked, from an architectural standpoint, very much like the old courthouse that had been built in 1892. And during the 1930s, the post office was a little small for the needs of a post office, and it was also the time when the country was experiencing what was known as the Great Depression. Times were very bad. Many people were out of work, and in those days they didn't have many of the programs to enable people to have money when they were not working. And because of that, some people had made the decision to tear down the old post office and in that way give people an opportunity to work and earn money by doing the demolition work. Unfortunately, the old post office was so beautiful that once it was torn down, it was lost forever. And it was in 1936 that the existing post office and the mural you described was first completed.
We walked by a big building down on the river called the Federal Building. It had lots of steps in front of it. We could see the bridge from the steps. How long has that building been there?
That's a good question, Stephanie. Actually, before that building was built, there was a building called the Customs House that had been built in the middle of the 1800s. And the Customs House was getting a little bit small for the needs of the Port of Wilmington, which was growing very much in size. And approximately 1920, the existing federal building replaced it. And we can say that after all these years, it's more than 80 years since that building has been finished, in many ways it's one of the most beautiful buildings that's in Wilmington.
When we were walking down Water Street, we looked across the Cape Fear River at the USS North Carolina. It looks huge. How did they find a place to put it?
Well, that's a good question, Alexandra, because actually, when the United States government built the USS North Carolina in 1941, it was a battleship that had served the country during almost all the battles that had occurred during the Pacific portion of World War II. But by the early 1960s, the United States Navy no longer had a need for the battleship, and since it was named for our state, it makes sense that our state should try to find a place to keep it as a museum and show younger generations such as yours just what a battleship is like. It was decided, since Wilmington was the largest seaport in North Carolina, that the city of Wilmington would be the appropriate location. But the battleship was so big that it did not appear that it would be worthwhile to put it along the waterfront. We actually carved out of the low-lying land on the other side of the river a special berth at which to locate the battleship. And ever since the early 1960s, the battleship has been there.